Okay, so what you will be submitting for this task for a grade is this page of this document. And of course, if you had to handwrite it, then handwritten, and however many pages it took you to get all of this information down. Same thing with this, however, either this page with all of these notes on it, or however many pages it took you if you had to handwrite. And then I also am going to want page 2 of this master documents thing, but we actually need to add some information. So one thing I didn't do is say anything about argument diagrams and patterns when it comes to complex arguments. So you'll recall that I said that when it comes to argument diagrams, when we were focused on those 10 simple ones, I said that you should start with the premises and statement numbers and the label in parentheses, right? Start with premises, give statement numbers and the labels in parentheses, use arrow, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, when you're doing a diagram, always end with the statement number and the label for the conclusion. So we need to do a little text box around here, okay? And write complex arguments. Basically, things are still generally the same, but some things to keep in mind is that you're still going to always start with the premise. So if that's the case, you should never start with a subconclusion, okay? You should never end with a subconclusion. And of course that makes sense, right? Because the diagram captures the actual logical structure, and a subconclusion is like an in-between point between statements that function only as premises and the one towards which all other statements, any premises, their subconclusions are pointing towards, and that's the final conclusion. So another important note is that, and you can do maybe something like this, you should never start with a final conclusion. You should, mistake here. Oh no, this is true. Okay, so this is not a mistake. You should always end with, what do you think I'm going to say? A final conclusion. Okay, so these are special qualifications. So you have this general information about diagrams, and then these are things that you need to remember when it comes to complex arguments, knowing that this basically still holds generally true. So with complex arguments, another thing that you might tell yourself is, well, it's still going to be this, right? So you're always going to start with something that's just a premise, whether it's a simple argument or a complex argument. So go ahead and write this down. So something that we want to say, so generally about argument patterns is that this generally holds true for complex arguments, but we need to go ahead and make a special note. Okay, do a little text box. So what still generally holds is that P still equals at least one premise. There should be only one P when an argument has consecutive premises. Something I want you to note here is that if there are two or more consecutive subconclusions, you need to indicate each one. Example, you might have an argument, and remember when we're talking about patterns, we're talking about the actual ordering, the original sequencing in a paragraph. So let's say, for example, you're working on your complex argument for item 1, your week 2 response. You're definitely going to have a conclusion first. Let's just say you happen to have a complex argument. You might have a final conclusion, a premise, and then you might have 2 subconclusions. Okay, so here what I want you to understand is that when it comes to complex arguments, if you have two consecutive subconclusions, go ahead and list each instant. Now, if a statement's just a subconclusion repeated, you wouldn't put that in here. In argument patterns, we don't mark when a statement is repeated. You might want to write that as a warning sign generally down here. But in a complex argument, if you do have two unique subconclusions, you'll mark each one in whatever order they came. It could be that you had a final conclusion, two premises, a subconclusion, and then another one. You still use only one P to mark one or more premises. All right, so make sure you add this information that we have added here, and then you will submit this as your third item, this as your second item, and this as your first item.